Awesome. Let's get to it. So, first of all, hey everyone, thanks so much for joining today. For those unfamiliar, I'm John Lair, co-founder, general partner here at Workbench. At Workbench, we're a New York City-based enterprise seed fund, and we love focusing on all things go-to-market. We've been investing at seed for the past 12 years. And from an investment perspective, we cover both things infrastructure layer across AI, security dev tools, and also a lot at the application layer as well. And our team is based here in New York City and Flatiron. And the thing that we love spending the most time on with founders is really supporting all things go to market, really across that early journey for your company. So that ranges everything from messaging and ICP definition in the early days, that is getting your first few customers, helping with some back channels, even things like hosting pipeline dinners for you. And then when you're ready for your first few AEs, your first head of sales, helping you navigate that process and get the right people in seat. We've been really fortunate to work with some amazing portfolio companies over the past decade. As you can see, some of these logos, both in New York and beyond, on this slide. And we're always looking to meet new folks as well. So, our call to action at the end of this webinar is to please reach out to us if you're in any of these three buckets, whether you are actively raising a seed or pre seed right now, whether you are thinking about what's next, and hopefully, this is going to be a good, really exercise to get you in that mindset. And on the last perspective, you just want to nerd out on anything go to market. Digo, if you go to the next slide, what you could see is we're happy to talk everything from SOC 2, RFPs, design partnerships. Right now, actually, my co-founder Jess is helping one of our entrepreneurs navigate one of their, I think, first design partnerships and some contracts behind it. So that's the thing we love to really live and breathe on a daily basis. So without further ado, I'd really love to turn it over to Diego, who we have the pleasure of working with as our venture partner.
Cool. Hey, everybody. Diego Oppenheimer. So, quick intro. So, I'm a longtime entrepreneur. I've built a couple companies, and currently I'm a venture partner at Workbench, where I help out mostly with their AI companies and a lot of the kind of like CEO support. I also teach or help teach a class at Stanford at the business school around that's called research-driven inspiration, which helps with a big part of like the framework that I'm going to show today around how to use AI for doing market discovery is actually comes from that. And so super excited to be chatting today. It's a lot of content. So the one thing that I want you to like kind of think through is this is not meant to follow every single line, everything at once. I'm going to give you a large overview of like how I think about using these AI tools to do market discovery and understand looking for arbitrage opportunities in markets where you can go build a company. Um, John should be putting in the chat right now, and I can't see the chat, so apologies.
Yep, just did it.
Okay, great. So I work a Notion workbook. You can follow along. This is for you. Steal it, use it, replicate it, whatever you want. Around that. This is the idea here is for you to be able to start thinking about how you can use a bunch of the new AI tools for building your next opportunity or even finding your next opportunity. So, as I mentioned real quick, the what I'm going to go through it's about a 45-minute interactive seminar. We're going to have questions at the end. Feel free to put your questions into the chat. We'll try to get them all answered. If not, we'll be able to reply to you later over email. The goal of today is really to leverage new AI tools and advanced prompting techniques that are going to separate, kind of like superficial research, the typical, like I'm going to sit down there and do Google research around that. And, one prerequisite for today is some level of familiarity with ChatGPT or Claude or one of the LLMs. If you don't have any familiarity at this point, I would beg you to go do that immediately because I think in this world this is it's kind of like crucial. So first thing I want to give credit. So The framework I'm going to use today, and again, this is like I've applied a bunch of AI tooling to it, but the framework I'm going to use today is actually comes from, it's called research-driven inspiration. It's a framework that was developed at Stanford by Professor Scott Brady and Brett Jordan as part of the business school. It's a structured methodology for, actually going through what is called, they call it a prepared mind, how to go find opportunities in the market. So it's starting from an idea and then using different tooling to be able to go through the discovery, getting conviction and saying, hey, you know what, this is worth building, my next company or investigating in it. For those of you who haven't been entrepreneurs before, building a company is a long journey. And so really understanding and validating the opportunity before you go into like starting it out, I think is crucial. Couple of tool stack, really basic. So this is my operating system. I am not endorsing any specific one of these. I'm just trying to explain what I use on a regular basis. And so if you're trying to replicate kind of a stack, so I use all three major LLMs, a bunch. So the Anthropics, OpenAIs, and Google's, depending on the task. So one of the things that you're going to realize is that models really like Markdown, and Notion is a great Markdown knowledge management component. You can use Markdown, other ways of using Markdown if you prefer it, but that's just my preferred. This book's in Notion, as you can see that. I'm religious about transcribing all meetings. I have a terrible memory, and a core part of doing discovery is going to be talking to a lot of people and understanding it. And so being able to do your transcripts and schedule and stuff like that. And then I do a bunch of prototyping, so use a bunch of the tools, Cursor, Claude, around that. Um, Big warning for those of you who have not really like been using with AI, right? AI does create what's called a slop problem. It hallucinates very confidently. It doesn't always get you the proper results. So anytime you see a citation, anytime you see a figure, you must assume that the facts are wrong and that even though they sound plausible, or that the information's outdated because the model training has been so. Anytime there's a figure, anytime there's a number, I highly recommend you go back and verify it. And I think it's funny because the example I'm going to show you today, I didn't go run all the verifications. So don't take any of the figures that you see today as gospel. I wanted to show the strategy and the methodology. It's on you to go validate, triangulate, do source checking across all of these numbers to consistency before you actually make a bet on it. Um, I like AI for formatting structure, first drafts, routine analysis. Humans always need to decide strategic direction, anything that's involved. So um, that's the pre-warning. Let's get into it. Very quickly, where we are in time. We're in 2026, this inflection point of being able to use AI for pretty much anything across the kind of discovery space, and it really accelerates the opportunities that you might have doing it. We can synthesize interviews in minutes. We can generate maps. We can look at competitive at scale, and that's one of the things that we are going to walk through today. Um, so I'm going to run an example today, and this is going to be a running example. And so Aegis Regulatory Intelligence, we wanted to put together the life cycle of a company that was relevant and interesting. So interesting to some. I apologize if regulatory tech, it might not be your most entertaining subject. But it happens to be that there is a, $18.6 billion global, reg tech market. Most of the solutions today are architected around banking and capital markets, but insurance compliance is actually something that is fairly manual, very fragmented tooling, and we can see that the reactive workflows haven't really been keeping up to pace with it. And so with an insurance industry that has been moving very quickly into creating more and more regulation across 50 different state jurisdictions, there's new licenses happening, and the fact that we're seeing a declining population in this space, there seems to be a potential for a AI first native opportunity in this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually walk through how to do the discovery once we have this insight on what might potentially look like a platform that might be worth building. And as obviously as John said, if regulatory tech, insurance, and building in this space gets you really excited. Workbench is your team. They love this stuff. And so you should be, please call us and think about it. So the first thing around that the RDI framework kind of like puts us out is like, how do we validate this opportunity exists? And so I'm going to show you some prompting strategies on how to go do that. So we need to get quickly to finding what's called a haystack and building context. And one of the things that that in case, and again, for those of you who are very advanced at prompting, this might be really basic, but I want to kind of like, kind of like talk through that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to do market exploration. So what does a bad prompt look like? Tell me more about compliance for insurance. Why is this a bad prompt? This is kind of like how we would previously, queried Google, right? Or used a search engine. LLMs in particular are very good when you give them very, very tight examples. You direct them in a way you want to do it, and you actually specify and give detail of how you want that information, do it. So in this case, to tell me about compliance for insurance, it's too vague. It has no structure, and it's just going to get you a generic answer. So it's really not going to push AI to where you can do it. So what a good prompt example looks like, right, is actually having this conversation as if it was going to be an analyst. I'm exploring AI native regulatory compliance for insurance and financial services. I specifically am curious about continuous compliance monitoring, automatic regulatory tracking, AI model governance for insurance. And I want you to help me assess this with doing research in a deeply way around this. So, what are the market dynamics? What does the current market look like? What are the changes that have happened in the last 2 years? We're giving some level of time frame so that it can go be specific about that search. What are the key tailwinds? What are the key headwinds? We want to understand what the landscape looks like, right? So who are the major category players? So insurance carriers, red check vendors. For each category, I want you to give me 2 or 3 examples. Um, what are the economic realities about this? So, what is the typical compliance spending for a mid-market? Why do we care about that? We want to understand whether the arbitrage and money opportunity exists, right? Where the premiums exist and how people are spending money. How are compliance budgets allocated today across people, technology, and outside counsel? Understand where those drivers are coming from. I want to see where the main cost drivers are, right? And so that we understand like that. And then what are some non-obvious insights, right? What are the things that like a typical surface area, Google search or Bing search, if anybody uses that, will actually provide. And then where are some of the research gaps? So as the LLM is building you this initial view of the world, we're already trying to identify where some of these things are going to have gaps, where some of these things are not going to work around that. So I want to talk about, and again, my goal with today is to get you around the mentality of how to run this process with AI, not to tell you exactly how to do it, because the reality is that it has a lot of flexibility. So this is really around framework and mentality more than anything else. So why does this example work versus the previous one? It's very specific. It's not just about reg tech. I'm actually looking at AI native compliance for insurance, asking about continuous monitoring in AI model governance, which is a sliver of the software, not just compliance software, which is way too generic. I'm asking for structured output. Again, clear sections with expected format, how I want the paragraphs, how I want the bullets, why I want it scannable in a specific way is going to allow me to frame this in a better way. I want it to be time bound because the relevance of there's regulatory relevance, right? So our suspicion initially is that this is more important now and will be more important moving in the future than it was, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And so that timeout matters. And then we want to give it, push it beyond the obvious, explicit, non-obvious insights, asking for insider versus outsider like information. Disagree. Remember, these AIs have a massive search capability on top of a massive synthesizing capability. And this is really important to be able to bring that. And then the meta instruction, which is it forces the model to identify gaps, right? So how do you stress test this thing, right? That you're actually like putting together. And then I want that output. So, as I mentioned, I tried to get everything out. So I put a little bit of the output here. But what I really do is actually create these markdown files that are usually the output of whatever LLM I use. And you can kind of go see how I have pretty formatter for Markdown. So if you just have a browser, you're not going to get this off the bat. But you can see how the output was now. I have my initial assessing the space, right? So is this worth it? So I can see that the market dynamics. So it's teaching me about like where the 24 states that have adopted a specific like NAIC model bulletin. I can see what the stakeholder landscape looks like, right? We have the insurance carriers, we have the reg tech vendors, we have the compliance consultancies, the regulators, the reinsurers. We start understanding what the spend looks like, right? In a typical compliance scenario, where they're allocating budget, right? We can see here that 55 to 65% of allocation is towards people, right? And this tells us, okay, that is means that like, whatever margins or whatever interests are in, this is going to be like very much built on that. But there's also a massive amount of outside counsel and consultants, right? Which are used for different parts of the component, which is a big part as well. So these are all places where we're saying, hey, where is the opportunity? All right. We're seeing that out of this entire spend, 10 to 20% is technology. So baseline, we already know that they're spending a decent amount on tools, right? That might actually give us the opportunity to go build a business in. Cost drivers, some of those non-obvious insights, right? Like this is a ticking clock, not a theoretical risk. So in a lot of cases, for those of you who actually built companies before, a why now moment matters a lot. And so we're seeing that there's actually a why now moment that's happening based on regulatory. The who's buying, I think this was a surprise to me. Usually I would have assumed that this was going to be the chief compliance officer, but it's actually the CFO, right? Because the CFO is looking at these rising compliance costs, and that's actually hitting both top and bottom line and margins across the business. And how those things go. So, and then we have what the research gaps look like, right? And what they might, what would be the questions that we would want to ask? So if you have friends, if you have a network, if you're in the space and you have opportunity to start talking to regulators, reg tech operators, compliance officers, this now starts giving you a guidance into, hey, where should I go do that exploration? The most important part around the difference between querying models, a search engine, and models is iterativeness. So the beauty of working with these LLMs is that you can actually have a conversation just like a human would have a conversation. If you and I were having a discussion about something, we would iterate on the subject and we would iterate on the context in a continuous way. We would set up the conversation some way. This is a natural thing between humans and how we actually we talk. But we would say, hey, here's the context, here's what I'm setting, and then we would start narrowing it down into any piece that we would be chatting through. And I think this is a really important way of thinking about how you would actually be iterating it, right? And so, in this case, we said, hey, reinsurers are quietly becoming compliance gatekeepers, which was interesting to me. These are the people who are actually buying and selling that insurance. And why is this happening? When now specifically, what changed in the treaty negotiations that would make this a material factor? What tools are the reinsurers using? What happens operationally, that fails, and why is this dynamic, segmented, or how does it exist? And again, I'm starting from a very generic, place. I'm creating these primers and I'm feeding the primers back into the model so that we can continue narrowing down that conversation so we can get to hey, ultimately, should I be starting in something like this? And where do I start and how do I do it? And so the big parts here on why this works, building on the previous context, AI remembers that conversation. It's laser focused on one insight. So we stopped, we gave it the wide breadth of search, but now we're actually bringing it down into something that's a lot more reasonable so that we can get a lot more specificity around it. We can ask for root causes and current solutions, and then we can start testing around the pain if that's, universal or not. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you can see here that, why is this pressure emerging? Dora made it, mandatory, not optional. Here's the acts that made that. The UA, in the US, NAIC model bulletin was created as a parallel. Um, the actual kind of like, the fact that catastrophes or risk adjusted catastrophe have gone down actually softened the market. And now we can actually see what those tools look like, right? So we see that they're using traditional financial statements, historical loss triangles, on-site underwriting. And we can start seeing where some of these things are coming out from a technology perspective. So Munich Re, I just know this because I know the team there, like they're pretty much at the head of kind of like AI compliance from a global company perspective. So they've kind of been determining the standard to a certain degree of like technology and how it's used it. But there's no standardized compliance score. There's no automated continuous monitoring. There's no shared taxonomy for mapping that AI governance. And so these are all interesting components of saying, oh, maybe there's an opportunity here that should be chased. Um, Again, this is actually going really deep into a space and giving you like a good, starting to hone in on what might be a good opportunity. So in this case, the thesis is the reinsurers as gatekeepers dynamic creates a potential go-to-market shortcut that bypasses that traditional slow carrier by carrier enterprise sale because you can now go through the reinsurer. If a reinsurer actually recommends or actually requires the at sentence used as a specific compliance platform. Now, instead of selling to 200 mid-market carriers one at a time, you might be selling to 5 reinsurers who actually influence a thing. And so this is an interesting kind of like market dynamic, right? When you start thinking about, so John talked about like we nerd out a bunch on the kind of go-to-market stuff, like starting to understand these kind of like buying paths, understanding who those buying paths go through and how that distribution might look like is something really interesting to explore before even starting the business. And I apologize for all those who I speak really fast. So if that's true, I'm sure that the team will give you a recording later. You can slow me down or make me faster if I'm meandering on anything. So how do I use these tools, right? Just so you can think about it, right? I tend to use Claude or ChatGPT, and they're kind of, it used to be called de-research mode. Now it's actually built into the model. So you just kind of like, in some cases you can trigger it by saying think deeply, or you can actually change the settings so that they can actually go through that. I look for recent data either through web search or, kind of using Perplexity or one of the other search engines. I spend a bunch of time trying to validate claims before moving forward with a bet. So those can come from industry reports. And then I like mapping stakeholders. I think this is actually something that's underappreciated, that visualizing how communication, money, and influence flows through a system is really important for looking before a market before you enter it. So now we're actually going to go into how to build a industry primer. A little bit historically, I don't know, like maybe some folks on the call have done this, but so Amazon's pretty famous for their 6-pager memos and their kind of like work back documents. I personally never worked at Amazon, but love them. I believe in narratives. I believe in writing out ideas is better. I personally hate decks. So sorry for any of those who love presentations. I don't think they communicate information well. Now, I'll go back to that risk that we talked about initially of just generating random pages of slop. That's not what we want to do. What we really want to do is talk about how, we can build truly good narratives so that we can follow and go build companies based off of that. So the idea here is to actually create our industry primer. This is a core part of the RDI framework. And the idea here is to make you what's called cocktail party conversational. So come to a cocktail party, be the expert, inlet room about this. And so the first thing I like doing is setting the stage for the LLM. So I say, act as an interesting analyst who spent 6 months researching regulatory technology for insurance and financial services. Create a comprehensive primer that you would bring a smart MBA student up to speed on the space. Doesn't, again, you can play around with these like prompts all you want. There's really no good or wrong answer. This essentially just gives you like the tone, the reading level, the kind of like depth that is required, and also kind of like starts framing on like what the audience that's for. So the first thing we want is industry definition and scope. Why do we care about it? We want the mark again. See how these are my prompts. So this is, you can see how I structure them, right? I want a specific section on this and I want these things answered. I want the market overview. I want sizing. I want geographic distribution. I want to show the growth drivers and the constraints. I want you to organize the players, right? By, kind of like vendor insurance, how they go. I want the economic structure. I want the value chain. I want the technologies that are actually used, what's being used today, not. We want the regulatory and policy landscape. We want the headwinds and tailwinds. We want to see what the competitive dynamics are. And then we want to start creating this open question controversies, right? So how do I actually get there so that I can start answering questions that might be like really important? Um, I'm going to go ahead and pop that open just so you see it. And we get our actual primer, right? Industry scope, what's included, who are we talking, what's the market sizing? Again, go validate all of these numbers, but you want to make sure that these are right. We can start seeing the breakout, how much they're spending on, insurance IT spend, how much is going to be like done across the general like geographic distributions, what the growth drivers are, where we're seeing some of the categories where the companies that are coming out, who are the compliance platforms that exist today. We see some even horizontal AI governance tooling. So one of the companies I was mentioned earlier today, you can see them. They have a full cycle performance monitoring and governance around this. Um, the We see compliance consultancies, we see the core insurance platform vendors, and then who's actually looking at it from an investment perspective also is starting to pop up around that economic structure, et cetera. So we get very in depth. I'll let you explore this on your own. But starts actually giving you a very, very in depth where you should be going, what are being looked at, how should I go find and think about the market dynamics around this. So why this works? We're doing role setting. We're giving explicit structure. We're giving meta instructions. We're prioritizing guidance, right? Ask me like counterintuitive stuff over like what's easily Googleable. We're doing a practical framing, right? We don't need narratives. We don't need story time, right? What we want is factual, kind of like operator knowledge of how things work, so I can get very in depth into this market and understand, hey, is it worth me going and building something, right? And you can actually say, hey, when you're uncertain, just say so that we can go look at it. After generating those initial primers, we can start iterating through it. And so one of the things that I really like doing is I say this is creating these diagrams around insurance and regulatory tax. So where's the flow of regulations going to? Where's the flow of capital? Where's the flow of compliance obligations? What's the flow of risk? And it takes like 2 seconds to create with one of these tools, actually a pretty interesting visual tool. And let me see if this pops open. Oops, let's see here if I can open it here. Okay, well, you're gonna have to open it on your, oh, there you go. And what I did here is I actually created a interactive, and sorry if it's, let's see if it's in light mode is a little bit better. Yeah, I created an interactive flowchart, right, of where the capital solutions, the RegTech vendors, how do they communicate, what are their different policies. This actually gives you a map of the world, which I think is a really interesting way of breaking down a industry in a market and starting to understand where, again, arbitrage and venture creation opportunities might lie. So, so once we have this list, right, and I'm going to start accelerating it because I only have like 10 minutes. We want to leave open for question. So then the next step is, okay, great. Now I have a live document, which is my primer. I have a pretty good understanding of what the industry I'm going into. I have a pretty good understanding of who the players are and what they are and how information flows. But what I really want to do is I'm going to start doing interviews. So before going into a space, you know, people ask me always like, how many interviews should I be doing? As many as you possibly can. I think there's legitimately like, for any business, and I've started 4 or 5 of these with this methodology, like I would say you do 50 to 100 interviews easily, right? In a space to get confidence that like, there's really here an opportunity. And it's all about, signal, right? And iteration path. And how can you actually get as much information as possible from the, from the industry. So now that we have the primer, let's actually start doing some of the go-to-market or discovery tasks and use AI for it. So the first thing is I want to generate a list. So based on this insurance primer that we have, I want to help me build a targeted list of research interviews. I want to speak with people across these categories. So I'm specifically telling it I want compliance team, RegTech vendors, investors, regulators, reinsurance underwriters, and compliance consultancies. And here's the reasons why. For each, I want you to help me create a persona profile. What is their title? What is their typical background? What do they do? What do they don't? What are some of the valuable things that I can get from an interview? I want to specifically target 5 to 10 companies per category, and I want to see what my potential sourcing strategies are. And so I can go build that, right? And now I actually have the ability to, you can see here, which is like, here's how I actually go and say, here's my personas, role title, typical background, what they do, how they're valuable, what are the questions I'm going to ask. I want a persona and VP regulatory affairs. I want a compliance analyst. I want to go maybe talk to specific insurance companies and I can get on the calls. The reason why this is so useful is that this is essentially then you can sit with LinkedIn or you can sit with your Rolodex or whatever it is that you're doing with it, and you can go find these people, right? This actually gives you the opportunity to go very, very quickly and find these people, around that. So once we've actually created the primer, segmented by stakeholder and type, request both archetypes, persona, specific targets, include sourcing strategy, how to reach them, etc. We can now start doing this for, AI, using it for AI LinkedIn sourcing. AI LinkedIn still is today as much of a hard ecosystem because they're very, very very resistant to automation, and they have a bunch of reasons that you can't scrape it and use it. But even from a manual perspective, it is the best, the business source of data. There's other things that you can buy and you can get Zoom info. And there's a bunch of other stuff that you can work with. But in general, LinkedIn has been my go-to. So now I can start creating the queries that I care about, right? So what are the compliance officers in the mid-market? What job titles? What company descriptions? How do I, what are the queries that I should be using? What are the filter criteria I might want to use? And then help me create some messaging, right? I want 3 different outreach templates. One, which is when I have no mutual connection, they don't know me. If I have a couple mutual, connection, I can talk to them. Maybe I can actually, and I want this to be concise. And so it can help me with that messaging. I added the example there. You can go check this out whenever you have time around how to build out that messaging. But again, like, we started out from this like very top level uh, space, and then we've been narrowing down the context of the conversation into honing down on a particular interest, understanding who is part of this business, who is part of this like ecosystem and market. Inside of that, now I can go another level and be like, okay, now help me with the tasks of actually generating some of these things. So finally, we're going to go through the research synthesis and pattern recognition. So I now finally got, in this case, Lisa Marchetti, she, responded to me and she said, hey, I'm willing to have a call. I can give an example of who she is. So I'm giving a little bit to the LLM. So these are the prompts. And then I said, help me build a interview, an interview workflow. For any of you who's never done research or user interviews, don't stick to a very, very strict workflow. The whole point is a dynamic conversation with humans that is actually useful. So this is really just a guide. It's not meant for you to read like line by line or to try to get it. But the things that you want to care about are obviously building rapport, what the core questions might look like, asking some things that are around that. And because we have the primer and we've already built it, we can actually generate those interviews in a fairly straightforward way, right? Which is, what are the core questions we want to ask? Pain points and bottlenecks, what tools and systems they are using, where are their failure modes today, what are some of the workarounds, etc. So this works because it's specific to the persona context. So we've narrowed the world of the AI down to like, what the mid-market, kind of like in her and things like that. We've given it an explicit time structure, so we're not going to meander around. We've given it a tone, guidance, so it actually has a specific language around it. So now we can grab that same interview and we can adapt it to a couple more people. Again, we want to do hundreds of these interviews, ideally, or 50 to 100 interviews. And so we can actually generate those guides for each one of them.
Diego, question from the audience.
Yeah,
Is it worth creating a product or even some mock-ups before starting the interviews?
I think not. And at least not the initial ones. The reason for that is because at this point we are just looking for opportunities, right? We don't know what the product is. So like you shouldn't have, so when we started here, we really talked about, and it's totally fine. Like I've started from a technology as well, and you can adapt this process to starting from a technology. But really, at this point, before having these initial interviews, we just are conscious that there might be an interesting market opportunity And therefore, there might be an opportunity to build a product into that market opportunity. And what we're doing at this stage is validating that. And so any product that you have might be guiding that you just want to hear how they do things today, what are their problems, how they're doing them, and stuff like that. And so I would say at this stage, no, but like in the future for sure. Like eventually you will redo these interviews or these product discovery interviews where you want to show them examples, say, hey, how would you use this and stuff like that.
A related question that came in, so to do it now before we move forward, is what would your recommendation be for someone who's seen the problem firsthand and wants to build out the product? How do they go through this interview process still? Like, do they still do it? Should they adapt it?
Yeah, you can absolutely adapt it. I think, if you were like one of these people, like you're one of them and you saw this problem over and over again, I would warn you that like it's sometimes we're a little myopic because we've only seen our world. So, but if you have confidence that like this is the world and this is the problem and you've lived it. I mean, first of all, that's a huge advantage. So like to me, and we talk a lot about this like from a founder perspective, like having deep understanding of the market you're going into is a huge advantage. And so what I'd probably maybe reduce the amount of like pre-interviews that I have, but still remember you only have your point of view. And so this will also help you get other players' point of view in your space. So maybe you can skip like, hey, I've been a regulator. I understand that place well. I don't need to talk to other regulators. That's totally fine. But you still have other kind of like versions of that problem and different viewpoints. Don't miss out on the opportunity to go discover them. Um, So one of the things that these LLMs are fantastic at is cross synthesis, right? So the reason for you want to record the transcripts of every single one of these calls is that then you'll be able to do things like find me the geek insights. What are the surprises? What are the pain points? What are the emotional signals? What are some of the workflow insights? Follow-up questions, and then you can do cross-interview pattern recognition. And this is key. This is probably one of the most leveraged points of doing this process that you'll ever find with AI, which is grabbing hundreds of videos and saying, what are the common themes? Where are the divergences? Where are people not agreeing? Is it by persona? Is it by category of buyer? Where, you start talking about the buying process and like, is it super different between mid-market and kind of like the larger companies? These insights are gold, right? From that perspective. And I think you can go and, kind of like build in around that. So I do these cluster analysis. I do these kind of like, I said that kind of like I talk about the diagrams, and you can see it here. Let me see if I can pop it open. Right. Again, these are all generated automatically with AI for me, so I can see, hey, there's been 757 state level regulations. There's the regulators. There's the carrier compliance workflow. They detect, they interpret, they map, they implement, they document, they respond to an exam. We are proposing this full value chain right now. Like we're thinking about the product, regulatory monitoring, evidence engine, AI governance. We see kind of like the emerging compliance gatekeepers. These are the people who are actually gatekeeping that business. And then here's where the solutions lie, right? Law firms, banks, big four, et cetera. So now I'm visually understanding the space I'm going into. And I've done this, this has been like, a couple hours of work of going back and forth. Obviously, the interviews take time. You have to schedule them, but that's kind of like the idea. And so then we start asking about where the opportunities might lie, right? And so based on the research, the stakeholders, everything we've done, let's go find those opportunities, right? What and score them. Let's give it a rubric for actually scoring those opportunities and actually looking at what those might look like. So I can understand that maybe, hey, we saw this. Pain point one, exam readiness is a total fire drill. Okay. How do they get around that? What is the cost? What are we looking at? What's the opportunity hypothesis? What could be built? So this is going back to that question around the, hey, should I build the product? Some of the stuff here is going to be like, hey, this is going to pop up out of this work. So where those things might happen. And here's how to validate it. Here's the market related to that validation. Here's a second pain point, right? What's the root cause for it? What are the current workarounds? Again, market hypothesis, product hypothesis, and validation questions. This is so much cheaper to do than to kind of go build product and try to like, push a boulder out there. Let's be clear. In today's world with AI, writing code is not the hard part. It's going to be like building something, getting in front of somebody and having them adopt it. And so when you recognize an opportunity and when you recognize a pain point, you have chances of being able to like land something in that pain point, even if you grow from there, is way larger than trying to push that boulder up that at that hill. So that's essentially it. This works because it grounds everything in your research. It forces evidence-based reasoning. It gives you structure around that evaluation framework. It incorporates your personal rubric and it not, and the scoring. I guess I didn't actually show the scoring, so you can kind of go see that. I'll just put that real quick. Um, duh, duh, duh. Yeah, and so you can see kind of like where the strategy and the scoring might look like, right? So scoring table, market, size, timing, defensibility, founder fit, your personal, go to market clarity, capital efficiency. So these are all things that you can actually create a rubric before going into that market opportunity. So with that said, if you follow the workbook down, there's more resources, there's some next steps that you can actually go check out. And I will turn it over to questions.
First of all, Diego, on behalf of everyone who I know is virtual, I just want to say thanks so much. That was phenomenal. The chat is filled, so we'll get to that in a moment. But I just want to speak on behalf of everyone and say thanks so much. For everyone on the call, Diego is way too humble. But from his early days on the Excel team at Microsoft to being a multi-time entrepreneur, one of the companies of which we had the very good fortune of investing in Algorithmia, to now advising companies, angel investing, pre-seed investing, and being very active at Stanford GSB, where he helps teach this class on this related subject. We're very fortunate and grateful to have Diego with us today. So thank you, Diego. I'm
Love
going
it.
to scroll through the Zoom chat now and try to get to the more general questions that I didn't interrupt you for. So first is prompting is an incredibly powerful tool. It seems you can spend a lot of time refining your prompts and your outreach. How do you make sure your prompting is driving efficiency in your ideation process, but you're still quick to move on and not let perfect get in the way of good?
I mean, I think that's it right there, right? So like, you have to have this is where like your intuition into the space is really important. I think like why I would generally say if you have like no clue about a space, try to have a clue about the space before going in because you'll understand. I agree with you. Like prompting today machine learning models are stochastic, right? By definition. Like AI is stochastic. So even with the same prompt, you're going to get a different answer, slightly different answer. And so the question here is never to pursue perfection, but to actually understand like, is this, getting you faster to a structure that then you can add your human kind of like final decision making on it. Like I don't have AI make any decisions for me. I help it frame. I have it help me frame things. I have it help me explore things from the top, and I have it help me poke holes into things, but never make decisions. And so that's kind of like the balance that I strike between the two.
Awesome. This one's a bit more tactical. Are you using one continuous conversation, a GPT project, Gemini Gem, or multiple chat sessions? Have you seen context management or compaction issues with such a deep flow?
Yeah. So as of like, 2 weeks ago, I would say you have to like step this through. I think Claude now released their like 2 million yeah, if you pay, like you have the 2 million context or the million context. Cowork, if you use that on your desktop, essentially saves things to files. So like we'll do a little bit of the IO for you, save down, pick up. And so it does a little bit of this context management. You will hit context issues with these larger explorations. And this is why every single one of the steps has an output. And then I start from the output and then kind of go into the next one because you don't need truly like eventually my guess is that you won't need to do any of these steps, but you don't really need to rely on like you can let it auto compact and stuff like that, but like once you have these like different outputs you can kind of play around with those files.
Nice. Another one. Due to the nature of LLMs, isn't the risk of hallucination higher the more specific the prompt or the ask? For instance, for the persona creation, how can you be sure that a persona or part of a persona is correct and not slop?
Yeah, so again, like the use of AI is an acceleration, not an excuse or permission to turn off your brain. Right. And so, you still need to be looking at it and be like, why does this persona make sense? How can I go validate it? Is this the right kind of persona? Are they, when I go and have an interview, if I'm like, oh, this person knew nothing about this space and constantly are not doing, that should be relevant to you. So again, like the use of AI is an accelerant, Again, not an excuse to turn off your brain.
Could the founder who doesn't come from industry create the right product? What credibility does the person bring? Do they have to be related? I think this is part of what helps you explore the industry to get smart on it, but I'm curious your take, Diego.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I don't plenty of founders have gone into industries that they knew nothing about, right? And they got smart on it. And again, this process is also about how to get smart on an industry. There's no question that having been in an industry and lived it is an advantage. It's an advantage from credibility when you're doing outreach and saying, "Hey, I worked in this industry and I know about you." One of the core components of sales, especially enterprise sales, is show me that you know me, right? And so understanding who you're talking to and understanding who you're right. Like again, so I don't ever want to discount the huge leg up that having experience in an industry or understanding an industry deeply, but you can get really smart on an industry quickly these days by following some of these steps. So it's just a question more of validation. You'll have to be a little bit more skeptical and you'll have to kind of rely a little bit more on your charm and kind of like kind of curiosity to get the meetings and get the discovery done versus being able to just rely on a title or stuff like that. For folks who have gone to this is just a reality of universities that have like big alumni groups like Stanford does or like NYU does, like those are great ways of starting to get into industry because if you're like, hey, I went to NYU and I'm doing blah blah blah, like other NYU people will like likely pick up the phone just for that, right? Like there's just a lot of kind of that kind of
Yep.
like and so you're just gonna have to find if you're a stranger to an industry, you're gonna have to find how to tap into the human networks of that industry so that you can run some of this information gathering.
Awesome. Very tactical question. How are you getting this output from LLM well formatted into Notion like this?
So I request that all output is done in Markdown.
Fantastic.
So I asked the LLM to do it, and then I just did this just for this call, literally, because it was like the output I got from you saw when I was clicking on the links, it was like kind of ugly formatted and then it kind of pretty formatted real quickly. I downloaded an extension like literally 30 minutes ago to like pretty print just for examples to show it. So you can download a Chrome extension that like makes your markdown. I usually use my IDE like Warp or Cursor for markdown, but you don't need that. But yes, specifically to your question, request the output to be in markdown.
Nice. This one is even a step before this process. Wondering Diego's advice from his current seat and when he was a founder about how to come up with an initial area to start the process on. Has AI been useful in that, like almost pre-step? Do you need some domain expertise or general efficiency?
Yeah, so I think we all have a what do you call it? Like I think we all have a tendency to go in a specific direction based on our kind of natural interest, right? Like what I would not do. I wouldn't like open AI, and I think this is like all over Twitter, which I think is funny, but just like find me a business. Like that's a ridiculous query and like will not work. I think it's more about exploring areas of interest to you. Like this is more philosophical, has nothing to do with AI. Like if you're gonna go build a company, you better like, be into it. Like you'll be doing this for
Yeah.
years. And sometimes it's gonna be great and sometimes it's gonna be horrible. And the only thing that kind of keeps you from like kind of going crazy when you're building a company from like scratch is a deep, deep obsession and interest with a problem. And so, to your specific question, like you can use AI to explore anything, but I wouldn't do anything, much less go build a company in anything.
Yeah, just to add to that, in the past, Diego, we've always joked about startups being that sinusoidal journey with the highest highs, lowest lows. I feel like that's been compressed in the age of AI. So you're just getting punched in the face more. And to Diego's point, if you're just a mercenary in it and you're not living and breathing and wanting to do it, if that passion's not there, it's going to be too hard for you to succeed in just in today's world more than ever. How are you thinking through picking opportunities that won't potentially be made obsolete by releases from the AI LLM providers? There's a lot of unknowns out there, so nothing's totally future-proof, but how do you and us think about that?
Yeah, so I have a framework where like I think about it as kind of like, is this thing one or two standard deviations away from like just the model in itself, right? And like, I look at things that things that have permanence from my perspective are deep data moats where like, there's network effects on like how you're building the business. Like this example I did right here, right? Like the chances of any of the LLM providers going into this space, right, is very low. There's just so much regulatory, so much deep knowledge and workflows and stuff like that, like that. There's just permanence in that. And so to answer your question specifically, like I'm still, learning every day of how to think about it, right? Like the reality is that like what does happen when the cost of software creation asymptotically goes to zero, that doesn't mean that the cost of maintaining and running and operating software goes to zero. It's just the creation. What changes, right? Like what business change, like what customizations change, where do things go? Like this is like I don't have a silver bullet for you on this answer, like because I'm thinking about this constantly, right? Like they're not going to absorb everything, but it is interesting around that surface area and kind of like thinking through, like, okay, is this a one standard deviation away from what the incumbents are doing, or two, and what does that mean, and how does that look like?
Any thoughts on custom models versus commercial models providing a moat?
Um, it depends on the workflow, right? I think we've seen the general foundation models, the general foundation models are moving at a pace and a capability pace that for generic stuff, it's unlikely, in my opinion, that custom models would ever, kind of like be on par. Even open source is really good. Like, I mean, like I use plenty of open source models for some of my work, mostly as exploratory. They're not quite there, right? Like the best models are still the kind of like now from from a kind of like custom model perspective, if you are fine tuning on top of one of these models, if you have a very specific workflow that you're understanding, if you're understanding, you have a in AI and machine learning, specificity tends to produce better results when you can narrow the space as much as possible. And so if it has some of these qualities, your workflow or the data that you're working on, then I would say there's things there.
Nice. I think we have time for one or two more. Looks like your approach is basically using an LLM out of the box. Can we assume the standard training data is sufficient these days rather than sourcing insight data from an expert network or like a Gartner analyst?
Was that for you or for me?
I think it's remote. I mean, I can tell you Gartner tends to be behind these days. They have been for the past decade. So what's really nice about this approach is you're almost building your own industry analyst report on something that is more future forward looking. And then
Yeah.
doing the interviews, that's the key part. The framework helps you get to the people to do the interviews to understand, is there an opportunity here?
Yeah.
Um, how it's given it's so easy to build products, how's your evaluation approach changed? I guess that's for both of us. I mean, for us at Workbench, we've been beating this drum that go to market matters forever, but even more so in an age of AI, when it gets easier for just competitors to, on a daily basis, develop new products that have some or all of your features, go to market and the velocity at which you can really meet customers, close them, expand that share within them is going to be a big part of your moat. In addition to one of the other questions we got is how do we diligence these days against the big providers? It's what Diego said with these ingrained workflows, but a big piece also is there some sort of data moat? And it's almost getting cliche to say that, but we have some companies where as you get in and the users are using it, whether it's like with reinforcement learning or some other fine tuning, the model's getting better for this bespoke use case and it becomes embedded in the process side of a big organization. And when you can get the people and process done in addition to just the tech these days, that's going to help you be stickier. Awesome. Diego, again, thank you so much. There's been like 20 different people that said thank you in the chat, and I see some more stuff flowing in. So really useful, real good engagement for everyone on the line. You have the notion here, but we'll resend that in the recap email with the video when it's posted. So thank you again for joining, and thank you, Diego.
Have a good one. Thanks, everybody.